"Yes, but a man can't nurse a baby," said Petzoff, "while a woman—" "No, there was an Englishman who did suckle his baby on board ship," said the old prince, feeling this freedom in conversation permissible before his own daughters. "There are as many such Englishmen as there would be women officials," said Sergei Ivanovitch. "Yes, but what is a girl to do who has no family?" put in Stepan Arkadyevitch, thinking of Masha Chibiskova, whom he had had in his mind all along, in sympathizing with Petzoff and supporting him. "If the story of such a girl were thoroughly sifted, you would find she had abandoned a family, her own or a sister's, where she might have found a woman's duties," Darya Alexandrovna broke in unexpectedly in a tone of exasperation, probably suspecting what sort of girl Stepan Arkadyevitch was thinking of. "But we take our stand on principle as the ideal," replied Petzoff in his mellow bass. "Woman desires to have rights, to be independent, educated. She is oppressed, humiliated by the consciousness of her disabilities." "And I'm oppressed and humiliated that they won't engage me at the Foundling," the old prince said again, to the huge delight of Turovtsin, who in his mirth dropped his asparagus with the thick end in the sauce. Chapter 11. Everyone took part in the conversation except Kitty and Levin. At first, when they were talking of the influence that one people has on another, there rose to Levin's mind what he had to say on the subject. But these ideas, once of such importance in his eyes, seemed to come into his brain as in a dream, and had now not the slightest interest for him. It even struck him as strange that they should be so eager to talk of what was of no use to anyone. Kitty, too, should, one would have supposed, been interested in what they were saying of the rights and education of women. How often she had mused on the subject, thinking of her friend abroad, Varenka, of her painful state of dependence. How often she had wondered about herself, what would become of her if she did not marry, and how often she had argued with her sister about it. But it did not interest her at all. She and Levin had a conversation of their own, yet not a conversation, but some sort of mysterious communication, which brought them every moment nearer, and stirred in both a sense of glad terror before the unknown into which they were entering. At first, Levin, in answer to Kitty's question how he could have seen her last year in the carriage, told her how he had been coming home from the mowing along the high road and had met her. "It was very, very early in the morning. You were probably only just awake. Your mother was asleep in the corner. It was an exquisite morning. I was walking along, wondering who it could be in a four-in-hand. It was a splendid set of 4 horses with bells, and in a second you flashed by, and I saw you at the window. You were sitting like this, holding the strings of your cap in both hands and thinking awfully deeply about something," he said, smiling. "How I should like to know what you were thinking about then. Something important?" "Wasn't I dreadfully untidy?" she wondered, but seeing the smile of ecstasy these reminiscences called up, she felt that the impression she had made had been very good. She blushed and laughed with delight. "Really, I don't remember." "How nicely Turovtsin laughs," said Levin, admiring his moist eyes and shaking chest. "Have you known him long?" asked Kitty. "Oh, everyone knows him." "And I see you think he's a horrid man." "Not horrid, but nothing in him." "Oh, you're wrong. And you must give up thinking so directly," said Kitty. "I used to have a very poor opinion of him too, but he's an awfully nice and wonderfully good-hearted man. He has a heart of gold." "How could you find out what sort of heart he has?" "We are great friends. I know him very well. Last winter, soon after you came to see us," she said with a guilty and at the same time confiding smile, All Dolly's children had scarlet fever, and he happened to come and see her. And only fancy, she said in a whisper, he felt so sorry for her that he stayed and began to help her look after the children. Yes, and for 3 weeks he stopped with them and looked after the children like a nurse. I am telling Konstantin Dmitrievitch about Turovtsin in the scarlet fever, she said, bending over to her sister. Yes, it was wonderful, noble, said Dolly, glancing towards Turovtsin, who had become aware they were talking of him, and smiling gently to him. Levin glanced once more at Turovtsin, and wondered how it was he had not realized all this man's goodness before. I'm sorry, and I'll never think ill of people again, he said gaily, genuinely expressing what he felt at the moment. Chapter 12. Connected with the conversation that had sprung up on the rights of women, there were certain questions as to the inequality of rights in marriage improper to discuss before the ladies. Pestsov had several times during dinner touched upon these questions, but Sergei Ivanovitch and Stepan Arkadyevitch carefully drew him off them. When they rose from the table and the ladies had gone out, Pestsov did not follow them, but addressing Alexey Alexandrovitch began to expound the chief ground of inequality. The inequality in marriage, in his opinion, lay in the fact that the infidelity of the wife and the infidelity of the husband are punished unequally, both by the law and by public opinion. Stepan Arkadyevitch went hurriedly up to Alexey Alexandrovitch and offered him a cigar. "No, I don't smoke," Alexey Alexandrovitch answered calmly, and as though purposely wishing to show that he was not afraid of the subject, he turned to Pestsov with a chilly smile. "I imagine that such a view has a foundation in the very nature of things," he said, and would have gone on into the drawing-room. But at this point Turovtsin broke suddenly and unexpectedly into the conversation, addressing Alexey Alexandrovitch. "You heard, perhaps, about Pryatchnikov?" said Turovtsin, warmed up by the champagne he had drunk, and long waiting for an opportunity to break the silence that had weighed on him. "Vasya Pryatchnikov," he said, with a good-natured smile on his damp red lips, addressing himself principally to the most important guest, Alexey Alexandrovitch. "He told me today he fought a duel with Kvitsky at Tver, and has killed him." Just as it always seems that one bruises oneself on a sore place, so Stepan Arkadyevitch felt now that the conversation would, by ill luck, fall every moment on Alexey Alexandrovitch's sore spot. He would again have got his brother-in-law away, but Alexey Alexandrovitch himself inquired with curiosity, "What did Pryatchnikov fight about?" "His wife. Acted like a man, he did. Called him out and shot him." "Ah," said Alexey Alexandrovitch indifferently, and lifting his eyebrows he went into the drawing-room. "How glad I am you have come," Dolly said with a frightened smile, meeting him in the outer drawing-room. "I must talk to you. Let's sit here." Alexey Alexandrovitch, with the same expression of indifference given him by his lifted eyebrows, sat down beside Darya Alexandrovna and smiled affectedly. "It's fortunate," said he, "especially as I was meaning to ask you to excuse me and to be taking leave. I have to start tomorrow." Darya Alexandrovna was firmly convinced of Anna's innocence, and she felt herself growing pale and her lips quivering with anger at this frigid, unfeeling man who was so calmly intending to ruin her innocent friend. "Alexey Alexandrovitch," she said, with desperate resolution, looking him in the face, "I asked you about Anna. You made me no answer. How is she?" "She is, I believe, quite well, Darya Alexandrovna," replied Alexey Alexandrovitch, not looking at her. "Alexey Alexandrovitch, forgive me. I have no right, but I love Anna as a sister and esteem her. I beg, I beseech you to tell me what is wrong between you. What fault do you find with her?" Alexey Alexandrovitch frowned, and almost closing his eyes, dropped his head. "I presume that your husband has told you the grounds on which I consider it necessary to change my attitude to Anna Arkadyevna," he said, not looking her in the face, but eyeing with displeasure Shtcherbatsky, who was walking across the drawing-room. "I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I can't believe it," Dolly said, clasping her bony hands before her with a vigorous gesture. She rose quickly and laid her hand on Alexey Alexandrovitch's sleeve. "We shall be disturbed here. Come this way, please." Dolly's agitation had an effect on Alexey Alexandrovitch. He got up and submissively followed her to the schoolroom. They sat down to a table covered with an oilcloth cut in slits by penknives. I don't believe it," Dolly said, trying to catch his glance that avoided her. "One cannot disbelieve facts, Darya Alexandrovna," said he, with an emphasis on the word facts. "But what has she done?" said Darya Alexandrovna. "What precisely has she done?" "She has forsaken her duty and deceived her husband. That's what she has done," said he. "No, it can't be. No, for God's sake, you are mistaken," said Dolly, putting her hands to her temples and closing her eyes. Alexey Alexandrovitch smiled coldly, with his lips alone, meaning to signify to her and himself the firmness of his conviction. But this warm defence, though it could not shake him, reopened his wound. He began to speak with greater heat. "It is extremely difficult to be mistaken when a wife herself informs her husband of the fact, informs him that 8 years of her life, and a son, all that's a mistake, and that she wants to begin life again," he said angrily, with a snort. "Anna and sin, I cannot connect them. I cannot believe it." "Darya Alexandrovna," he said, looking straight into Dolly's kindly, troubled face, and feeling that his tongue was being loosened in spite of himself, "I would give a great deal for doubt to be still possible. When I doubted, I was miserable, but it was better than now. When I doubted, I had hope, but now there is no hope, and still I doubt of everything. I am in such doubt of everything that I even hate my son, and sometimes do not believe he is my son. I am very unhappy." He had no need to say that. Darya Alexandrovna had seen that as soon as he glanced into her face, and she felt sorry for him, and her faith in the innocence of her friend began to totter. "Oh, this is awful, awful! But can it be true that you are resolved on a divorce?" "I am resolved on extreme measures. There is nothing else for me to do." "Nothing else to do? Nothing else to do," she replied with tears in her eyes. "Oh, no, don't say nothing else to do," she said. "What is horrible in a trouble of this kind is that one cannot, as in any other, in loss, in death, bear one's trouble in peace, but that one must act," said he, as though guessing her thought. "One must get out of the humiliating position in which one is placed. One can't live à trois." "I understand, I quite understand that," said Dolly, and her head sank. She was silent for a little, thinking of herself, of her own grief in her family, and all at once, with an impulsive movement, she raised her head and clasped her hands with an imploring gesture. "But wait a little. You are a Christian. Think of her. What will become of her if you cast her off?" "I have thought, Darya Alexandrovna. I have thought a great deal," said Alexey Alexandrovitch. His face turned red in patches, and his dim eyes looked straight before him. Darya Alexandrovna at that moment pitied him with all her heart. "That was what I did indeed when she herself made known to me my humiliation. I left everything as of old. I gave her a chance to reform. I tried to save her. And with what result? She would not regard the slightest request. That she should observe decorum, he said, getting heated. One may save anyone who does not want to be ruined, but if the whole nature is so corrupt, so depraved, that ruin itself seems to her salvation, what's to be done? Anything, only not divorce, answered Darya Alexandrovna. But what is anything? No, it is awful. She will be no one's wife. She will be lost. What can I do? Said Alexey Alexandrovitch, raising his shoulders and his eyebrows. The recollection of his wife's last act had so incensed him that he had become frigid, as at the beginning of the conversation. I am very grateful for your sympathy, but I must be going, he said, getting up. No, wait a minute. You must not ruin her. Wait a little. I will tell you about myself. I was married, and my husband deceived me. In anger and jealousy, I would have thrown up everything. I would myself. But I came to myself again, and who did it? Anna saved me, and here I am living on. The children are growing up. My husband has come back to his family and feels his fault, is growing purer, better, and I live on. I have forgiven it, and you ought to forgive. Alexey Alexandrovitch heard her, but her words had no effect on him now. All the hatred of that day when he had resolved on a divorce had sprung up again in his soul. He shook himself and said in a shrill, loud voice, Forgive I cannot, and do not wish to, and I regard it as wrong. I have done everything for this woman, and she has trodden it all in the mud to which she is akin. I am not a spiteful man. I have never hated anyone, but I hate her with my whole soul, and I cannot even forgive her because I hate her too much for all the wrong she has done me, he said with tones of hatred in his voice. Love those that hate you, Darya Alexandrovna whispered timorously. Alexey Alexandrovitch smiled contemptuously. That he knew long ago, but it could not be applied to his case. Love those that hate you, but to love those one hates is impossible. Forgive me for having troubled you. Everyone has enough to bear in his own grief. And regaining his self-possession, Alexey Alexandrovitch quietly took leave and went away. Chapter 13. When they rose from the table, Levin would have liked to follow Kitty into the drawing-room, but he was afraid she might dislike this, as too obviously paying her attention. He remained in the little ring of men, taking part in the general conversation, and without looking at Kitty he was aware of her movements, her looks, and the place where she was in the drawing-room. He did at once, and without the smallest effort, keep the promise he had made her, always to think well of all men, and to like everyone always. The conversation fell on the village commune, in which Pestsov saw a sort of special principle, called by him the choral principle. Levin did not agree with Pestsov, nor with his brother, who had a special attitude of his own, both admitting and not admitting the significance of the Russian commune. But he talked to them, simply trying to reconcile and soften their differences. He was not in the least interested in what he said himself, and even less so in what they said. All he wanted was that they and everyone should be happy and contented. He knew now the one thing of importance, and that one thing was at the first there, in the drawing-room, and then began moving across and came to a standstill at the door. Without turning round, he felt the eyes fixed on him, and the smile, and he could not help turning round. She was standing in the doorway with Shtcherbatsky, looking at him. "I thought you were going towards the piano," said he, going up to her. "That's something I miss in the country, music." "No, we only came to fetch you and thank you," she said, rewarding him with a smile that was like a gift, for coming. What do they want to argue for? No one ever convinces anyone, you know." "Yes, that's true," said Levin. "It generally happens that one argues warmly simply because one can't make out what one's opponent wants to prove." Levin had often noticed in discussions between the most intelligent people that after enormous efforts and an enormous expenditure of logical subtleties and words, the disputants finally arrived at being aware that what they had so long been struggling to prove to one another had long ago, from the beginning of the argument, been known to both, but that they liked different things and would not define what they liked for fear of its being attacked. He had often had the experience of suddenly in a discussion grasping what it was his opponent liked and at once liking it too, and immediately he found himself agreeing, and then all arguments fell away as useless. Sometimes, too, he had experienced the opposite, expressing at last what he liked himself, which he was devising arguments to defend, and, chancing to express it well and genuinely, he had found his opponent at once agreeing and ceasing to dispute his position. He tried to say this. She knitted her brow, trying to understand. But directly he began to illustrate his meaning, she understood at once. "I know. One must find out what he is arguing for, what is precious to him, and then one can—" She had completely guessed and expressed his badly expressed idea. Levin smiled joyfully. He was struck by this transition from the confused, verbose discussion with Pestsov and his brother to this laconic, clear, almost wordless communication of the most complex ideas. Shtcherbatsky moved away from them, and Kitty, going up to a card-table, sat down, and taking up the chalk, began drawing diverging circles over the new green cloth. They began again on the subject that had been started at dinner, the liberty and occupations of women. Levin was of the opinion of Darya Alexandrovna that a girl who did not marry should find a woman's duties in a family. He supported this view by the fact that no family can get on without women to help, that in every family, poor or rich, there are and must be nurses, either relations or hired. "No," said Kitty, blushing but looking at him all the more boldly with her truthful eyes. "A girl may be so circumstanced that she cannot live in the family without humiliation, while she herself—" At the hint he understood her. "Oh, yes," he said. "Yes, yes, yes. You're right, you're right." And he saw all that Pestsov had been maintaining at dinner of the liberty of woman, simply from getting a glimpse of the terror of an old maid's existence and its humiliation in Kitty's heart, and, loving her, he felt that terror and humiliation, and at once gave up his arguments. A silence followed. She was still drawing with the chalk on the table. Her eyes were shining with a soft light. Under the influence of her mood, he felt in all his being a continually growing tension of happiness. "Ah, I've scribbled all over the table," she said, and laying down the chalk she made a movement as though to get up. "What? Shall I be left alone, without her?" he thought in horror, and he took the chalk. "Wait a minute," he said, sitting down to the table. "I've long wanted to ask you one thing." He looked straight into her caressing, though frightened eyes. "Please ask it." "Here," he said, and he wrote the initial letters WYTMICNBD These letters meant, "When you told me it could never be, did that mean never, or then?" There seemed no likelihood that she could make out this complicated sentence, but he looked at her as though his life depended on her understanding the words. She glanced at him seriously, then leaned her puckered brow on her hands and began to read. Once or twice she stole a look at him, as though asking him, Is it what I think?" "I understand," she said, flushing a little. "What is this word?" he said, pointing to the N that stood for never. "It means never," she said. "But that's not true." He quickly rubbed out what he had written, gave her the chalk, and stood up. She wrote T-I-C-N-A-D. Dolly was completely comforted in the depression caused her by her conversation with Alexey Alexandrovitch when she caught sight of the two figures. Kitty, with the chalk in her hand, with a shy and happy smile looking upwards at Levin, and his handsome figure bending over the table, with glowing eyes fastened 1 minute on the table and the next on her. He was suddenly radiant. He had understood. It meant, "Then I could not answer differently." He glanced at her questioningly, timidly. "Only then?" "Yes," her smile answered. "And now?" he asked. "Well, read this. I'll tell you what I should like so much." She wrote the initial letters I, Y, C, F, A, F, W, H. This meant, "If you could forget and forgive what happened." He snatched the chalk with nervous trembling fingers and, breaking it, wrote the initial letters of the following phrase: "I have nothing to forget and to forgive. I have never ceased to love you." She glanced at him with a smile that did not waver. "I understand," she said in a whisper. He sat down and wrote a long phrase. She understood it all, and without asking him, "Is it this?" took the chalk and at once answered. For a long while he could not understand what she had written, and often looked into her eyes. He was stupefied with happiness. He could not supply the words she had meant, but in her charming eyes, beaming with happiness, he saw all he needed to know, and he wrote 3 letters. But he had hardly finished writing when she read them over her arm and herself finished and wrote the answer, "Yes." "You're playing secretaire," said the old prince. "But we really must be getting along if you want to be in time at the theatre." Levin got up and escorted Kitty to the door. In their conversation everything had been said. It had been said that she loved him, that she would tell her father and mother that he would come tomorrow morning. Chapter 14. When Kitty had gone and Levin was left alone, he felt such uneasiness without her, and such an impatient longing to get as quickly as possible to tomorrow morning, when he would see her again and be plighted to her forever, that he felt afraid, as though of death, of those 14 hours that he had to get through without her. It was essential for him to be with someone to talk to, so as not to be left alone, to kill time. Stefan Arkadyevitch would have been the companion most congenial to him, but he was going out, he said, to a soirée. In reality, to the ballet. Levin only had time to tell him he was happy, and that he loved him, and would never, never forget what he had done for him. The eyes and the smile of Stefan Arkadyevitch showed Levin that he comprehended that feeling fittingly. "Oh, so it's not time to die yet?" said Stefan Arkadyevitch, pressing Levin's hand with emotion. No, said Levin. Darya Alexandrovna, too, as she said good-bye to him, gave him a sort of congratulation, saying, "How glad I am you had met Kitty again. One must value old friends." Levin did not like these words of Darya Alexandrovna's. She could not understand how lofty and beyond her it all was, and she ought not to have dared to allude to it. Levin said good-bye to them, but not to be left alone, he attached himself to his brother. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to a meeting." "Well, "I'll come with you. May I?" "What for?" "Yes, come along," said Sergei Ivanovitch, smiling. "What is the matter with you today?" "With me? Happiness is the matter with me," said Levin, letting down the window of the carriage they were driving in. "You don't mind? It's so stifling. It's happiness is the matter with me. Why is it you have never married?" Sergei Ivanovitch smiled. "I am very glad. She seems a nice Sergei Ivanovitch was beginning. "Don't say it! Don't say it!" shouted Levin, clutching at the collar of his fur coat with both hands and muffling him up in it. "She's a nice girl," were such simple, humble words, so out of harmony with his feeling. Sergei Ivanovitch laughed outright, a merry laugh, which was rare with him. "Well, anyway, I must say that I'm very glad of it." "That you may do tomorrow. Tomorrow and nothing more. Nothing. Nothing." "Silence," said Levin, and muffling him once more in his fur coat, he added, "I do like you so. Well, is it possible for me to be present at the meeting?" "Of course it is." "What is your discussion about today?" asked Levin, never ceasing smiling. They arrived at the meeting. Levin heard the secretary hesitatingly read the minutes, which he obviously did not himself understand. But Levin saw from this secretary's face what a good, nice, kind-hearted person he was. This was evident from his confusion and embarrassment in reading the minutes. Then the discussion began. They were disputing about the misappropriation of certain sums and the laying of certain pipes, and Sergei Ivanovitch was very cutting to two members and said something at great length with an air of triumph, and another member, scribbling something on a bit of paper, began timidly at first, but afterwards answered him very viciously and delightfully. And then Sviazhsky, he was there too, said something too, very handsomely and nobly. Levin listened to them and saw clearly that these missing sums and these pipes were not anything real, and that they were not at all angry, but were all the nicest, kindest people, and everything was as happy and charming as possible among them. They did no harm to anyone, and were all enjoying it. What struck Levin was that he could see through them all today, and from little, almost imperceptible signs knew the soul of each, and saw distinctly that they were all good at heart. And Levin himself in particular they were all extremely fond of that day. That was evident from the way they spoke to him, from the friendly, affectionate way even those he did not know looked at him. "Well, did you like it?" Sergei Ivanovitch asked him. "Very much. I never supposed it was so interesting. Capital! Splendid!" Sviazhsky went up to Levin and invited him to come round to tea with him. Levin was utterly at a loss to comprehend or recall what it was he had disliked in Sviazhsky, what he had failed to find in him. He was a clever and wonderfully good-hearted man. "Most delighted," he said, and asked after his wife and sister-in-law. And from a queer association of ideas, because in his imagination the idea of Sviazhsky's sister-in-law was connected with marriage, it occurred to him that there was no one to whom he could more suitably speak of his happiness, and he was very glad to go and see them. Sviazhsky questioned him about his improvements on his estate, presupposing, as he always did, that there was no possibility of doing anything not done already in Europe, and now this did not in the least annoy Levin. On the contrary, he felt that Sviazhsky was right, that the whole business was of little value, and he saw the wonderful softness and consideration with which Sviazhsky avoided expressing his correct view. The ladies of the Sviazhsky household were particularly delightful. It seemed to Levin that they knew all about it already and sympathized with him, saying nothing merely from delicacy. He stayed with them 1 hour, 2, 3, talking of all sorts of subjects but the one thing that filled his heart, and did not observe that he was boring them dreadfully, and that it was long past their bedtime. Swijaschski went with him into the hall, yawning and wondering at the strange humour his friend was in. It was past 1 o'clock. Levin went back to his hotel and was dismayed at the thought that all alone now with his impatience he had 10 hours still left to get through. The servant, whose turn it was to be up all night, lighted his candles and would have gone away, but Levin stopped him. This servant, Yegor, whom Levin had noticed before, struck him as a very intelligent, excellent, and above all, good-hearted man. "Well, Yegor, it's hard work not sleeping, isn't it?" "One's got to put up with it. It's part of our work, you see. In a gentleman's house it's easier, but here one makes more." It appeared that Yegor had a family, 3 boys and a daughter, a sempstress who he wanted to marry to a cashier in a saddler's shop. Levin, on hearing this, informed Yegor that, in his opinion, in marriage the great thing was love, and that with love one would always be happy, for happiness rests only on one's self. Yegor listened attentively, and obviously quite took in Levin's idea, but by way of assent to it he enunciated, greatly to Levin's surprise, the observation that when he had lived with good masters he had always been satisfied with his masters, and now was perfectly satisfied with his employer, though he was a Frenchman. Wonderfully good-hearted fellow, thought Levin. Well, but for yourself, Yegor, when you got married, did you love your wife? Aye, and why not? Responded Yegor. And Levin saw that Yegor too was in an excited state and intending to express all his most heartfelt emotions. My life too has been a wonderful one, from a child up. He was beginning with flashing eyes, apparently catching Levin's enthusiasm just as people catch yawning. But at that moment a ring was heard. Yegor departed, and Levin was left alone. He had eaten scarcely anything at dinner, had refused tea and supper at Swijaschski's, but he was incapable of thinking of supper. He had not slept the previous night, but was incapable of thinking of sleep either. His room was cold, but he was oppressed by heat. He opened both the movable panes in his window and sat down to the table opposite the open panes. Over the snow-covered roofs could be seen a decorated cross with chains, and above it the rising triangle of Charles's Wain, with the yellowish light of Capella. He gazed at the cross, then at the stars, drank in the fresh freezing air that flowed evenly into the room, and followed as though in a dream the images and memories that rose in his imagination. At 4 o'clock he heard steps in the passage and peeped out at the door. It was the gambler, Myaskin, whom he knew, coming from the club. He walked gloomily, frowning and coughing. Poor, unlucky fellow, thought Levin, and tears came into his eyes from love and pity for this man. He would have talked with him, and tried to comfort him, but remembering that he had nothing but his shirt on, he changed his mind and sat down again at the open pane to bathe in the cold air and gaze at the exquisite lines of the cross, silent but full of meaning for him, and the mounting, lurid yellow star. At 7 o'clock there was a noise of people polishing the floors and bells ringing in some servants' department, and Levin felt that he was beginning to get frozen. He closed the pane, washed, dressed, and went out into the street. Chapter 15. The streets were still empty. Levin went to the house of the Shuchabatskys. The visitors' doors were closed and everything was asleep. He walked back, went into his room again, and asked for coffee. The day servant, not Yegor, this time, brought it to him. Levin would have entered into conversation with him, but a bell rang for the servant, and he went out. Levin tried to drink coffee and put some roll in his mouth, but his mouth was quite at a loss what to do with the roll. Levin, rejecting the roll, put on his coat and went out again for a walk. It was 9 o'clock when he reached the Shuchabatskys' steps the second time. In the house they were only just up, and the cook came out to go marketing. He had to get through at least 2 hours more. All that night and morning Levin lived perfectly unconsciously, and felt perfectly lifted out of the conditions of material life. He had eaten nothing for a whole day, had not slept for 2 nights, had spent several hours undressed in the frozen air, and felt not simply fresher and stronger than ever, but felt utterly independent of his body. He moved without muscular effort, and felt as if he could do anything. He was convinced he could fly upwards or lift the corner of the house if need be. He spent the remainder of the time in the street, incessantly looking at his watch and gazing about him. And what he saw then, he never saw again after. The children, especially, going to school, the bluish doves flying down from the roofs to the pavement, and the little loaves covered with flour thrust out by an unseen hand, touched him. Those loaves, those doves, and those 2 boys were not earthly creatures. It all happened at the same time. A boy ran towards a dove and glanced smiling at Levin. The dove, with a whir of her wings, darted away, flashing in the sun amid grains of snow that quivered in the air, while from a little window there came a smell of fresh-baked bread, and the loaves were put out. All of this together was so extraordinarily nice that Levin laughed and cried with delight. Going a long way round by Gazetny Place and Kislovka, he went back again to the hotel, and putting his watch before him, he sat down to wait for 12 o'clock. In the next room they were talking about some sort of machines and swindling and coughing their morning coughs. They did not realize that the hand was near 12. The hand reached it. Levin went out onto the steps. The sledge-drivers clearly knew all about it. They crowded round Levin with happy faces, quarrelling among themselves and offering their services. Trying not to offend the other sledge-drivers and promising to drive with them too, Levin took one and told him to drive to the Shuchabatskys. The sledge-driver was splendid in a white shirt collar sticking out over his overcoat and into his strong, full-blooded red neck. The sledge was high and comfortable, and altogether such a one as Levin never drove in after, and the horse was a good one, and tried to gallop but didn't seem to move. The driver knew the Shuchabatskys' house, and drew up at the entrance with a curve of his arm and a "Whoa!" especially indicative of respect for his fare. The Shuchabatskys' hall porter certainly knew all about it. This was evident from the smile in his eyes and the way he said, "Well, it's a long while since you've been to see us, Konstantin Dmitrievitch." "Well, it's a long while since you've been to see us, Konstantin Dmitrievitch." Not only he knew all about it, but he was unmistakably delighted and making efforts to conceal his joy. Looking into his kindly old eyes, Levin realized even something new in his happiness. "Are they up?" "Pray, walk in. Leave it here," he said, smiling, as Levin would have come back to take his hat. That meant something. "To whom shall I announce, Your Honor?" asked the footman. The footman, though a young man, and one of the new school of footmen, a dandy, was a very kind-hearted, good fellow, and he too knew all about it. "The princess, the prince, the young princess," said Levin. The first person he saw was Mademoiselle Lignon. She walked across the room, and her ringlets and her face were beaming. He had only just spoken to her, when suddenly he heard the rustle of a skirt at the door, and Mademoiselle Lignon vanished from Levin's eyes, and a joyful terror came over him at the nearness of his happiness. Mademoiselle Lignon was in great haste, and leaving him, went out at the other door. Directly she had gone out, swift, light steps sounded on the parquet, and his bliss, his life, himself, what was best in himself, what he had so long sought and longed for, was quickly, so quickly approaching him. She did not walk, but seemed by some unseen force to float to him. He saw nothing but her clear, truthful eyes, frightened by the same bliss of love that flooded his heart. Those eyes were shining nearer and nearer, blinding him with their light of love. She stopped still close to him, touching him. Her hands rose and dropped onto his shoulders. She had done all she could. She had run up to him and given herself up entirely, shy and happy. He put his arms round her and pressed his lips to her mouth that sought his kiss. She, too, had not slept all night, and had been expecting him all the morning. Her mother and father had consented without demur, and were happy in her happiness. She had been waiting for him. She wanted to be the first to tell him her happiness and his. She had got ready to see him alone, and had been delighted at the idea, and had been shy and ashamed, and did not know herself what she was doing. She had heard his steps and voice, and had waited at the door for Mademoiselle Lignon to go. Mademoiselle Lignon had gone away. Without thinking, without asking herself how and what, she had gone up to him and did as she was doing. "Let us go to mamma," she said, taking him by the hand. For a long while he could say nothing, not so much because he was afraid of desecrating the loftiness of his emotion by a word, as that every time he tried to say something, instead of words he felt that tears of happiness were welling up. He took her hand and kissed it. "Can it be true?" he said at last in a choked voice. "I can't believe you love me, dear." She smiled at that dear, and at the timidity with which he glanced at her. "Yes," she said significantly, deliberately, "and I'm so happy." Not letting go his hands, she went into the drawing-room. The princess, seeing them, breathed quickly, and immediately began to cry, and then immediately began to laugh, and with a vigorous step Levin had not expected, ran up to him, and hugging his head, kissed him, wetting his cheeks with her tears. "So it is all settled. I am glad. Love her. I am glad. Kitty!" "You've not been long settling things," said the old prince, trying to seem unmoved, but Levin noticed that his eyes were wet when he turned to him. "I've always wished for this," said the prince, taking Levin by the arm and drawing him towards himself. "Even when this little feather-headed fancied—" "Papa!" shrieked Kitty, and shut his mouth with her hands. "Well, I won't," he said. "I'm very, very Oh, what a fool I am!" He embraced Kitty, kissed her face, her hand, her face again, and made the sign of the cross over her. And there came over Levin a new feeling of love for this man, till then so little known to him, when he saw how slowly and tenderly Kitty kissed his muscular hand. Chapter 16. The princess sat in her arm-chair, silent and smiling. The prince sat down beside her. Kitty stood by her father's chair, still holding his hand. All were silent. The princess was the first to put everything into words, and to translate all thoughts and feelings into practical questions, and all equally felt this strange and painful for the first minute. "When is it to be? We must have the benediction and announcement. And when's the wedding to be? What do you think, Alexander?" "Here he is," said the old prince, pointing to Levin. "He's the principal person in the matter." "When?" said Levin, blushing. "Tomorrow. If you ask me, I should say the benediction today and the wedding tomorrow. Come, mon cher, that's nonsense. Well, in a week. He's quite mad. No, why so? Well, upon my word, said the mother, smiling, delighted at this haste. How about the trousseau? Will there really be a trousseau and all that? Levin thought with horror. But can the trousseau and the benediction and all that, can it spoil my happiness? Nothing can spoil it. He glanced at Kitty and noticed that she was not in the least, not in the very least, disturbed by the idea of the trousseau. Then it must be all right, he thought. Oh, I know nothing about it. I only said what I should like, he said apologetically. We'll talk it over then. The benediction and announcement can take place now. That's very well. The princess went up to her husband, kissed him, and would have gone away, but he kept her, embraced her, and tenderly as a young lover, kissed her several times, smiling. The old people were obviously muddled for a moment, and did not quite know whether it was they who were in love again or their daughter. When the prince and the princess had gone, Levin went up to his betrothed and took her hand. He was self-possessed now and could speak, and he had a great deal he wanted to tell her. But he said not at all what he had to say. How I knew it would be so! I never hoped for it, and yet in my heart I was always sure, he said. I believe that it was ordained. And I, she said, even when... She stopped and went on again, looking at him resolutely with her truthful eyes. Even when I thrust from me my happiness, I always loved you alone, but I was carried away. I ought to tell you. Can you forgive that? Perhaps it was for the best. You will have to forgive me so much. I ought to tell you. This was one of the things he had meant to speak about. He had resolved from the first to tell her two things, that he was not chaste as she was, and that he was not a believer. It was agonizing, but he considered he ought to tell her both these facts. No, not now. Later, he said. Very well, later. But you must certainly tell me. I'm not afraid of anything. I want to know everything. Now it is settled. He added, settled that you'll take me whatever I may be. You won't give me up? Yes? Yes, yes. Their conversation was interrupted by Mademoiselle Linon, who, with an affected but tender smile, came to congratulate her favourite pupil. Before she had gone, the servants came in with their congratulations. Then relations arrived, and there began that state of blissful absurdity from which Levin did not emerge till the day after his wedding. Levin was in a continual state of awkwardness and discomfort, but the intensity of his happiness went on all the while increasing. He felt continually that a great deal was being expected of him. What, he did not know, and he did everything he was told, and it all gave him happiness. He had thought his engagement would have nothing about it like others, that the ordinary conditions of engaged couples would spoil his special happiness, but it ended in his doing exactly as other people did, and his happiness being only increased thereby and becoming more and more special, more and more unlike anything that had ever happened. Now we shall have sweetmeats to eat, said Mademoiselle Linon, and Levin drove off to buy sweetmeats. Well, I'm very glad, said Sviazhsky. I advise you to get the bouquets from Fomin's. Oh, are they wanted? And he drove to Fomin's. His brother offered to lend him money, as he would have so many expenses, presents to give. Oh, are presents wanted? And he galloped to Fold's. At the confectioner's, and at Fomin's, and at Fold's, he saw that he was expected, that they were pleased to see him, and prided themselves on his happiness, just as everyone whom he had to do with during those days. What was extraordinary was that everyone not only liked him, but even people previously unsympathetic, cold, and callous were enthusiastic over him, gave way to him in everything, treated his feeling with tenderness and delicacy, and shared his conviction that he was the happiest man in the world because his betrothed was beyond perfection. Kitty, too, felt the same thing. When Countess Nordston ventured to hint that she had hoped for something better, Kitty was so angry and proved so conclusively that nothing in the world could be better than Levin, that Countess Nordston had to admit it, and in Kitty's presence never met Levin without a smile of ecstatic admiration. The confession he had promised was the one painful incident of this time. He consulted the old prince, and with his sanction gave Kitty his diary, in which there was written the confession that tortured him. He had written this diary at the time with a view to his future wife. Two things caused him anguish: his lack of purity and his lack of faith. His confession of unbelief passed unnoticed. She was religious, had never doubted the truths of religion, but his external unbelief did not affect her in the least. Through love she knew all his soul, and in his soul she saw what she wanted, and that such a state of soul should be called unbelieving was to her a matter of no account. The other confession set her weeping bitterly. Levin, not without an inner struggle, handed her his diary. He knew that between him and her there could not be, and should not be, secrets, and so he decided that so it must be. But he had not realized what an effect it would have on her, and had not put himself in her place. It was only when the same evening he came to their house before the theatre, went into her room, and saw her tear-stained, pitiful, sweet face, miserable with suffering he had caused and nothing could undo, he felt the abyss that separated his shameful past from her dove-like purity, and was appalled at what he had done. "Take them! Take these dreadful books!" she said, pushing away the notebooks lying before her on the table. "Why did you give them me?" "No, it was better anyway," she added, touched by his despairing face. "But it's awful, awful!" His head sank, and he was silent. He could say nothing. "You can't forgive me," he whispered. "Yes, I forgive you, but it's terrible." But his happiness was so immense that this confession did not shatter it, it only added another shade to it. She forgave him, but from that time more than ever he considered himself unworthy of her, morally bowed down lower than ever before her, and prized more highly than ever his undeserved happiness. Chapter 17. Unconsciously going over in his memory the conversations that had taken place during and after dinner, Alexey Alexandrovitch returned to his solitary room. Darya Alexandrovna's words about forgiveness had aroused in him nothing but annoyance. The applicability or non-applicability of the Christian precept to his own case was too difficult a question to be discussed lightly, and this question had long ago been answered by Alexey Alexandrovitch in the negative. Of all that had been said, what struck him most in his memory was the phrase of the stupid, good-natured Turovtsin. "Acted like a man, he did. Called him out and shot him." Everyone had apparently shared this feeling, though from politeness they had not expressed it. "But the matter is settled. It's useless thinking about it," Alexey Alexandrovitch told himself. And thinking of nothing but the journey before him and the revision work he had to do, he went into his room and asked the porter who escorted him where his man was. The porter said that the man had only just gone out. Alexey Alexandrovitch ordered tea to be sent him, sat down to the table, and taking the guide-book began considering the route of his journey. 2 telegrams, said his manservant, coming into the room. I beg your pardon, Your Excellency. I'd only just that minute gone out. Alexey Alexandrovitch took the telegrams and opened them. The first telegram was the announcement of Stremov's appointment to the very post Karenin had coveted. Alexey Alexandrovitch flung the telegram down and, flushing a little, got up and began to pace up and down the room. Quos vult perdere dementat, he said, meaning by quos the persons responsible for this appointment. He was not so much annoyed that he had not received the post, that he had been conspicuously passed over, but it was incomprehensible, amazing to him, that they did not see that the wordy phrasemonger Stremov was the last man fit for it. How could they fail to see they were ruining themselves, lowering their prestige by this appointment? Something else in the same line, he said to himself bitterly, opening the second telegram. The telegram was from his wife. Her name, written in blue pencil, Anna, was the first thing that caught his eye. I am dying. I beg, I implore you to come. I shall die easier with your forgiveness, he read. He smiled contemptuously and flung down the telegram. That this was a trick and a fraud, of that, he thought, for the first minute there could be no doubt. There is no deceit she would not stick at. She was near her confinement. Perhaps it is the confinement. But what can be their aim? To legitimize the child? To compromise me and prevent a divorce, he thought. But something was said in it. I am dying. He read the telegram again, and suddenly the plain meaning of what was said in it struck him. And if it is true, he said to himself, if it is true that in the moment of agony and nearness to death she is genuinely penitent, and I, taking it for a trick, refuse to go, that would not only be cruel, and everyone would blame me, but it would be stupid on my part. Pyotr, call a coach. I am going to Petersburg, he said to his servant. Alexey Alexandrovitch decided that he would go to Petersburg and see his wife. If her illness were a trick, he would say nothing and go away again. If she was really in danger and wished to see him before her death, he would forgive her if he found her alive, and pay her last duties if he came too late. All the way, he thought no more of what he ought to do. With a sense of weariness and uncleanness from the night spent in the train, in the early fog of Petersburg, Alexey Alexandrovitch drove through the deserted Nevsky and stared straight before him, not thinking of what was awaiting him. He could not think about it, because in picturing what would happen, he could not drive away the reflection that her death would at once remove all the difficulty of his position. Bakers' closed shops, night cabmen, porters sweeping the pavements flashed past his eyes, and he watched it all, trying to smother the thought of what was awaiting him, and what he dared not hope for, and yet was hoping for. He drove up to the steps. A sledge and a carriage with the coachman asleep stood at the entrance. As he went into the entry, Alexey Alexandrovitch, as it were, got out his resolution from the remotest corner of his brain and mastered it thoroughly. Its meaning ran, if it's a trick, then calm contempt and departure. If truth, do what is proper. The porter opened the door before Alexey Alexandrovitch rang. The porter, Kapitonitch, looked queer in an old coat, without a tie, and in slippers. How is your mistress? A successful confinement yesterday. Alexey Alexandrovitch stopped short and turned white. He felt distinctly now how intensely he had longed for her death. And how is she? Cornet, in his morning apron, ran downstairs. Very ill, he answered. There was a consultation yesterday, and the doctor's here now. Take my things, said Alexey Alexandrovitch, and feeling some relief at the news that there was still hope of her death, he went into the hall. On the hat-stand there was a military overcoat. Alexey Alexandrovich noticed it and asked, "Who is here?" "The doctor, the midwife, and Count Vronsky." Alexey Alexandrovich went into the inner rooms. In the drawing-room there was no one. At the sound of his steps there came out of her boudoir the midwife in a cap with lilac ribbons. She went up to Alexey Alexandrovich, and with the familiarity given by the approach of death, took him by the arm and drew him towards the bedroom. "Thank God you've come. She keeps on about you and nothing but you," she said. "Make haste with the ice," the doctor's peremptory voice said from the bedroom. Alexey Alexandrovich went into her boudoir. At the table, sitting sideways in a low chair, was Vronsky, his face hidden in his hands, weeping. He jumped up at the doctor's voice, took his hands from his face, and saw Alexey Alexandrovich. Seeing the husband, he was so overwhelmed that he sat down again, drawing his head down to his shoulders as if he wanted to disappear, but he made an effort over himself, got up and said, "She is dying. The doctors say there is no hope. I am entirely in your power. Only let me be here. Though I am at your disposal, Alexey Alexandrovich, seeing Vronsky's tears, felt a rush of that nervous emotion always produced in him by the sight of other people's suffering, and turning away his face he moved hurriedly to the door, without hearing the rest of his words. From the bedroom came the sound of Anna's voice saying something. Her voice was lively, eager, and with exceedingly distinct intonations. Alexey Alexandrovich went into the bedroom and went up to the bed. She was lying, turned with her face towards him. Her cheeks were flushed crimson, her eyes glittered, her little white hands, thrust out from the sleeves of her dressing-gown, were playing with the quilt, twisting it about. It seemed as though she were not only well and blooming, but in the happiest frame of mind. She was talking rapidly, musically, and with exceptionally correct articulation and expressive intonation. "For Alexey, I am speaking of Alexey Alexandrovich. What a strange and awful thing that both are Alexey, isn't it? Alexey would not refuse me. I should forget. He would forgive. But why doesn't he come? He's so good he doesn't know himself how good he is. Ah, my God, what agony! Give me some water, quick. Oh, that will be bad for her, my little girl. Oh, very well, then, give her to a nurse. Yes, I agree. It's better, in fact. He'll be coming. It will hurt him to see her. Give her to the nurse." "Anna Arkadyevna, he has come. Here he is," said the midwife, trying to attract her attention to Alexey Alexandrovich. "Oh, what nonsense!" Anna went on, not seeing her husband. "No, give her to me. Give me my little one. He has not come yet. You say he won't forgive me because you don't know him. No one knows him. I'm the only one, and it was hard for me even. His eyes I ought to know. Seryozha has just the same eyes, and I can't bear to see them because of it. Has Seryozha had his dinner? I know everyone will forget him. He would not forget. Seryozha must be moved into the corner room, and Mariette must be asked to sleep with him." All of a sudden she shrank back, was silent, and in terror, as though expecting a blow, as though to defend herself, she raised her hands to her face. She had seen her husband. "No, no," she began. "I am not afraid of him. I am afraid of death. Alexey, come here. I am in a hurry because I've no time. I've not long left to live. The fever will begin directly, and I shall understand nothing more. Now I understand. I understand it all. I see it all." Alexey Alexandrovich's wrinkled face wore an expression of agony. He took her by the hand and tried to say something, but he could not utter it. His lower lip quivered, but he still went on struggling with his emotion, and only now and then glanced at her. And each time he glanced at her, he saw her eyes gazing at him with such passionate and triumphant tenderness as he had never seen in them. "Wait a minute. You don't know. Stay a little, stay." She stopped as though collecting her ideas. "Yes," she began. "Yes. This is what I wanted to say. Don't be surprised at me. I'm still the same, but there is another woman in me. I'm afraid of her. She loved that man, and I tried to hate you, and could not forget about her that used to be. I'm not that woman. Now I'm my real self, all myself. I'm dying now. I know I shall die. Ask him. Even now I feel... See here the weights on my feet, on my hands, on my fingers. My fingers. See how huge they are. But this will soon be over. Only one thing I want. Forgive me. Forgive me quite. I'm terrible, but my nurse used to tell me. The holy martyr, what was her name? She was worse. And I'll go to Rome. There's a wilderness, and there I shall be no trouble to anyone. Only I'll take Seryozha and the little one. No, you can't forgive me. I know it can't be forgiven. No, go away, you're too good." She held his hand in one burning hand while she pushed him away with the other. The nervous agitation of Alexey Alexandrovitch kept increasing, and had by now reached such a point that he ceased to struggle with it. He suddenly felt that what he had regarded as nervous agitation was, on the contrary, a blissful spiritual condition that gave him all at once a new happiness he had never known. He did not think that the Christian law that he had been all his life trying to follow enjoined on him to forgive and love his enemies, but a glad feeling of love and forgiveness for his enemies filled his heart. He knelt down, and laying his head in the curve of her arm, which burned him as with fire through the sleeve, he sobbed like a little child. She put her arm around his head, moved towards him, and with a defiant pride lifted up her eyes. "That is he. I knew him. Now, forgive me, everyone, forgive me." "They've come again. Why don't they go away? Oh, take these cloaks off me." The doctor unloosened her hands, carefully laying her on the pillow, and covered her up to the shoulders. She lay back submissively and looked before her with beaming eyes. "Remember one thing, that I needed nothing but forgiveness, and I want nothing more. Why doesn't he come?" she said, turning to the door towards Vronsky. Do come! Give him your hand." Vronsky came to the side of the bed, and seeing Anna again hid his face in his hands. "Uncover your face. Look at him. He's a saint," she said. "Oh, uncover your face. Do uncover it," she said angrily. "Alexey Alexandrovitch, do uncover his face. I want to see him." Alexey Alexandrovitch took Vronsky's hands and drew them away from his face, which was awful with the expression of agony and shame upon it. "Give him your hand. Forgive him." Alexey Alexandrovitch gave him his hand, not attempting to restrain the tears that streamed from his eyes. Thank God," she said. "Now everything is ready. Only to stretch my legs a little. There, that's capital. How badly these flowers are done. Not a bit like a violet," she said, pointing to the hangings. My God, when will it end? Give me some morphine. Doctor, give me some morphine. Oh, my God. And she tossed about on the bed. The doctors said that it was puerperal fever, and that it was 99 chances in 100 it would end in death. The whole day long there was fever, delirium, and unconsciousness. At midnight the patient lay without consciousness and almost without pulse. The end was expected every minute. Vronsky had gone home, but in the morning he came to inquire, and Alexey Alexandrovitch, meeting him in the hall, said, "Better stay, she might ask for you," and himself led him to his wife's boudoir. Towards morning there was a return again of excitement, rapid thought and talk, and again it ended in unconsciousness. On the third day it was the same thing, and the doctors said there was hope. That day Alexey Alexandrovitch went into the boudoir where Vronsky was sitting, and closing the door sat down opposite him. "Alexey Alexandrovitch," said Vronsky, feeling that a statement of the position was coming, "I can't speak. I can't understand. Spare me. However hard it is for you, believe me it is more terrible for me." He would have risen, but Alexey Alexandrovitch took him by the hand and said, "I beg you to hear me out. It is necessary. I must explain my feelings, the feelings that have guided me and will guide me, so that you may not be in error regarding me. You know I had resolved on a divorce, and had even begun to take proceedings. I won't conceal from you that in beginning this, I was in uncertainty, I was in misery. I will confess that I was pursued by a desire to revenge myself on you and on her. When I got the telegram, I came here with the same feelings. I will say more. I longed for her death. But—" he paused, wondering whether to disclose or not to disclose his feelings to him. "But I saw her and forgave her, and the happiness of forgiveness has revealed to me my duty. I forgive completely. I would offer the other cheek, I would give my cloak if my coat be taken. I pray to God only not to take from me the bliss of forgiveness." Tears stood in his eyes, and the luminous, serene look in them impressed Vronsky. "This is my position. You can trample me in the mud, make me the laughing-stock of the world. I will not abandon her, and I will never utter a word of reproach to you," Alexey Alexandrovitch went on. "My duty is clearly marked for me. I ought to be with her, and I will be. If she wishes to see you, I will let you know. But now I suppose it would be better for you to go away." He got up, and sobs cut short his words. Vronsky too was getting up, and in a stooping, not yet erect posture, looked up at him from under his brows. He did not understand Alexey Alexandrovitch's feelings, but he felt that it was something higher and even unattainable for him with his view of life. Chapter 18. After the conversation with Alexey Alexandrovitch, Vronsky went out onto the steps of the Karenins' house and stood still, with difficulty remembering where he was, and where he ought to walk or drive. He felt disgraced, humiliated, guilty, and deprived of all possibility of washing away his humiliation. He felt thrust out of the beaten track along which he had so proudly and lightly walked till then. All the habits and rules of his life that had seemed so firm had turned out suddenly false and inapplicable. The betrayed husband, who had figured till that time as a pitiful creature, an incidental and somewhat ludicrous obstacle to his happiness, had suddenly been summoned by herself, elevated to an awe-inspiring pinnacle, and on the pinnacle that husband had shown himself not malignant, not false, not ludicrous, but kind and straightforward and large. Vronsky could not but feel this, and the parts were suddenly reversed. Vronsky felt his elevation and his own abasement, his truth and his own falsehood. He felt that the husband was magnanimous even in his sorrow, while he had been base and petty in his deceit. But this sense of his own humiliation before the man he had unjustly despised made up only a small part of his misery. He felt unutterably wretched now, for his passion for Anna, which had seemed to him of late to be growing cooler, now that he knew he had lost her forever, was stronger than ever it had been. He had seen all of her in her illness, had come to know her very soul, and it seemed to him that he had never loved her till then. And now, when he had learned to know her, to love her as she should be loved, he had been humiliated before her, and had lost her forever, leaving with nothing of himself but a shameful memory. Most terrible of all had been his ludicrous, shameful position when Alexey Alexandrovitch had pulled his hands away from his humiliated face. He stood on the steps of the Karenins' house like one distraught and did not know what to do. "A sledge, sir?" asked the porter. "Yes, a sledge." On getting home, after 3 sleepless nights, Vronsky, without undressing, lay down flat on the sofa, clasping his hands and laying his head on them. His head was heavy. Images, memories, and ideas of the strangest description followed one another with extraordinary rapidity and vividness. First it was the medicine he had poured out for the patient and spilt over the spoon, then the midwife's white hands, then the queer posture of Alexey Alexandrovitch on the floor beside the bed. "To sleep, to forget," he said to himself, with the serene confidence of a healthy man that if he is tired and sleepy he will go to sleep at once. And the same instant his head did begin to feel drowsy, and he began to drop off into forgetfulness. The waves of the sea of unconsciousness had begun to meet over his head, when all at once it was as though a violent shock of electricity had passed over him. He started so that he leapt up on the springs of the sofa, and leaning on his arms, got in a panic onto his knees. His eyes were wide open as though he had never been asleep. The heaviness on his head and the weariness in his limbs that he had felt a minute before had suddenly gone. "You may trample me in the mud," he heard Alexey Alexandrovitch's words, and saw him standing before him, and saw Anna's face with its burning flush and glittering eyes, gazing with love and tenderness not at him but at Alexey Alexandrovitch. He saw his own, as he fancied, foolish and ludicrous figure when Alexey Alexandrovitch took his hands away from his face. He stretched out his legs again and flung himself on the sofa in the same position and shut his eyes. "To sleep, to forget," he repeated to himself. But with his eyes shut he saw more distinctly than ever Anna's face as it had been on the memorable evening before the races. "That is not and will not be, and she wants to wipe it out of her memory. But I cannot live without it. How can we be reconciled? How can we be reconciled?" he said aloud, and unconsciously began to repeat these words. This repetition checked the rising up of fresh images and memories, which he felt were thronging in his brain. But repeating words did not check his imagination for long. Again, in extraordinarily rapid succession, his best moments rose before his mind, and then his recent humiliation. "Take away his hands," Anna's voice says. He takes away his hands and feels the shame-struck and idiotic expression of his face. He still lay down, trying to sleep, though he felt there was not the smallest hope of it, and kept repeating stray words from some chain of thought, trying by this to check the rising flood of fresh images. He listened and heard in a strange mad whisper words repeated. "I did not appreciate it, did not make enough of it. I did not appreciate it, did not make enough of it." "What's this? Am I going out of my mind?" he said to himself. "Perhaps. What makes men go out of their minds? What makes men shoot themselves?" he answered himself, and opening his eyes he saw with wonder an embroidered cushion beside him, worked by Varya, his brother's wife. He touched the tassel of the cushion and tried to think of Varya, of when he had seen her last. But to think of anything extraneous was an agonizing effort. "No, I must sleep." He moved the cushion up and pressed his head into it, but he had to make an effort to keep his eyes shut. He jumped up and sat down. "That's all over for me," he said to himself. "I must think what to do. What is left?" His mind rapidly ran through his life apart from his love of Anna. Ambition, Serpukhowskoy, society, the court. He could not come to a pause anywhere. All of it had had meaning before, but now there was no reality in it. He got up from the sofa, took off his coat, undid his belt, and uncovering his hairy chest to breathe more freely, walked up and down the room. "This is how people go mad," he repeated, "and how they shoot themselves. To escape humiliation," he added slowly. He went to the door and closed it. Then, with fixed eyes and clenched teeth, he went up to the table, took a revolver, looked round him, turned it to a loaded barrel, and sank into thought. For 2 minutes his head bent forward with an expression of an intense effort of thought. He stood with the revolver in his hand, motionless, thinking. "Of course," he said to himself, as though a logical, continuous, and clear chain of reasoning had brought him to an indubitable conclusion. In reality, this "of course" that seemed convincing to him was simply the result of exactly the same circle of memories and images through which he had passed 10 times already during the last hour, memories of happiness lost forever. There was the same conception of the senselessness of everything to come in life, the same consciousness of humiliation. Even the sequence of these images and emotions was the same. "Of course," he repeated, when for the 3rd time his thought passed round again the same spellbound circle of memories and images, and pulling the revolver to the left side of his chest and clutching it vigorously with his whole hand, as it were, squeezing it in his fist, he pulled the trigger. He did not hear the sound of the shot, but a violent blow on his chest sent him reeling. He tried to clutch at the edge of the table, dropped the revolver, staggered, and sat down on the ground, looking about him in astonishment. He did not recognize his room. Looking up from the ground at the bent legs of the table, at the waste paper basket and the tiger-skin rug, the hurried creaking steps of his servant coming through the drawing-room brought him to his senses. He made an effort at thought, and was aware that he was on the floor, and seeing blood on the tiger-skin rug and on his arm, he knew he had shot himself.